Perfect.
All right. Okay. So hello, everyone. Uh, Good to see you. Welcome to our next session. I have a special treat for everybody today. We're meeting with Dr. Guy Parmesan, who's joined us as a faculty member here at Miami. So first of all, Guy, thank you very much for joining
Dr.
us.
Evans, happy to be here.
Pleasure to have you here. Guy is actually a PhD student at Miami, or was a PhD student at Miami, and has been a longtime administrator. And we're very fortunate to have him on faculty here. In his most recent position, he served as superintendent in Benton Carroll Salem, correct? Which is up near Toledo, in kind of northwest Ohio, in that area. And so as the faculty has had a chance to get to know Guy over time, we've learned a lot about all the different experiences that educational leaders are faced with. And in particular, thinking about the challenges that we are faced with in terms of trying to navigate what's always been a complex political environment, but increasingly seems to be a complex political environment in terms of having to navigate multiple constituencies, trying to work with lots of different stakeholders. And so our hope today is just to share a little bit about a conversation about what does it really look like for an education leader when they're trying to navigate these complex political landscapes. And so if we could, we're going to start off just hearing a little bit more about Dr. Parmesan's background. So would you mind kind of sharing your conversation a little bit more about your
Thank you,
service?
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Yeah, I was a superintendent at Benton Carroll Salem schools in Ottawa County for 11 years, privileged. It was some of the happiest times of my life, some of the most challenging times of my life, and great to be at Miami now. Prior to that, I was a high school assistant principal and a career tech director and a curriculum director. So got to wear a couple different hats that prepared me for that superintendent role for sure.
Right. And so tell me a little bit about BCS. Like, is that where you had your background, or did you move to that district from outside?
I was in Greenville City Schools as curriculum director in 2012.
Okay.
And I wanted to be a superintendent, and I applied all over the state of Ohio. Benton Carroll Salem took a chance on me as a 36-year-old person with no experience. So it was a new community to me. The community that's in the center of our district is called Oak Harbor. It's a village of about 3,000 people. Benton Carroll Salem stand for 3 townships that comprise the district. And it's a relatively rural school district of about 1,500 students. That's what we had in our district. And we were home to Davis-Besse Nuclear Power Station, which presented its own unique finance challenges, which is maybe a story for another time. But at the time, when I arrived in 12, it was a relatively politically changing community. For example, President Obama came to campaign in Oak Harbor in 2012.
Okay.
Stopped at a little restaurant in town, and I believe won the county in 2012. And between 12 and 16, there was really that shift where the county went for Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020. So it was a changing political environment for sure.
And how does President Obama land in Oak Harbor? Like, was it the power plant, do you think, or was he trying to connect with rural voters, or like, just share a little bit more about that dynamic of, because I would imagine like the power plant's probably the primary employer.
Yeah, Ottawa County, I think, was a what do they call it? A county that was right on the mark.
Oh, like a swing
county.
Yeah.
It was a swing county. And we had Chris Redfern, who was the chair of the Democratic Party in the early 2000s, was the representative from Ottawa County. He lost his seat, I think, in 2014, which was a kind of symbolized that shift. So I think President Obama was there in 12 because it was a swing county, and I believe he won Ohio that year.
Okay.
In 2012, but things by 2016 it changed.
So your county is like almost purple in,
Yeah.
in terms at that
At
time.
that time, it was purple.
Now it's probably a little more red.
I think it's pretty strong red right now.
Strong red.
It went for Trump. It's the county level officials, I believe, are almost all Republican. And it was a mix, 10 years ago. So.
All right.
Definitely a changing community.
And so how did you see the changing political dynamics of the community start, or did it at all? Like, did you start to see it influence your work to try and lead the district?
In subtle ways, I think it was even though it was maybe a Democratic county at one point, it was always conservative, small c.
Okay.
There was conservative sensibilities. The town of Oak Harbor is a place where people know each other and really truly care about each other. But you also have some of that parochial nature of small towns, which is not so welcoming and nice if you don't fit that mold.
Okay.
I think that was always there. The idea of creating an environment that was welcoming of all, for people who have pink hair, for people who are students of color. Maybe they didn't find it as welcoming as a white person.
Okay. Would it be fair to say that there was kind of like a traditional
Yeah,
old guard?
traditional old guard is a good way to say it. For those people who are familiar with Andy Griffith and Mayberry, it was Mayberry. One day our police chief really was going up a tree to get a cat out of the tree. So yeah, small town, and for all the good and bad that means of small town Ohio, that's what it was.
Okay. And so for the context of this particular module, we're talking about navigating these complex kind of political landscapes. And as a case study to think about this, we've been, or the students are learning about the rise and the impact of some of the anti-LGBTQ plus legislation that we've seen recently. And I know you shared with me previously that as a part of your work, you look to create a GSA, a Gay Straight Alliance, in your district. Could you start off by sharing a little bit about what initially sparked your desire to try and move forward with developing or supporting an organization like this?
Yeah. It was really a moment that was created around, we had some students post some very ugly, nasty, racist social media posts having to do with African Americans, and that really got out onto social media, and the community didn't like what they saw. Oak Harbor had a history of being a sundown town and having some racial issues, but when confronted with these posts by high school students, it created this moment of, we don't like what we see. And what that created was a moment where, well, we can do better. We should do better. And so we initiated a survey where we asked students how they're feeling and how do they feel safe in our school. And through the survey, we did find, not surprisingly, unfortunately, that our students of color didn't feel safe. And more so, our LGBTQ students did not feel safe in our school. And that was profound. For myself, when you're staring at data right in black and white, it's just a moment I won't forget. It still makes me very uncomfortable when I think about that moment when I saw that. You have an inkling, but you don't know for sure.
Yeah.
When you see it on paper, and that was really an impetus for thinking about what we can do, not for just students of color, but our LGBTQ students.
Okay. So you had real concrete evidence.
Yeah.
This wasn't like
A hunch or anything.
hunch or anything, like students have so students have really come and like approached you, which I think so I think that's important. I wasn't aware of that part of the story. But when you do these surveys, or districts do these surveys, I mean, there should be an expectation that the district's going to respond. Like, how do you collect that information? This is my only question.
Yeah,
You know
no.
what I mean?
Yeah.
How do you collect this information about climate, and then when you get that information, not act?
Well, I think it's easy to not act sometimes.
Not really.
I think in a conservative community, it's easy to sweep things under the rug. And I think too often maybe I did in my time, in my time as an administrator, but I think I was at a point in my career, I think I was in year 8 or so, where I realized, you know what, it's time to have a little bit of courage and make sure that this issue remains front and center for our district and our Board of Education.
Okay. So if you'd seen that data year one, do you think you would have been a little slower to?
I might
act?
have, I possibly may have, I would, ashamed to probably say, but probably. But when I was new, I was still trying to figure things out. I think I had built up some political capital
Yeah,
over those years. And what does that mean? I think it means, you know, sometimes most of my board was, I think, Republican or conservative, and sometimes being to the right of board members on certain things like finance. You know, if you can really take a hard line on finance, that really appeals to people who are fiscally conservative, and that builds up some of that political capital that you could use. And I guess the thought that I had at the time was, well, it's time to spend some of this. If you're gonna to be superintendent, if it's not worth anything unless you can do something with it. So that's kind of the moment that presented. And another thing that at that moment is we had a really great head football coach, Mike May, who saw that data. And Mike was a true leader in our community. Head football coach, as you can imagine, in small town America, was a community leader, school district leader, really worked with me, as well as our high school principal, Mrs. Shell, just to say, we got to do something here. And so there began to build some momentum around, we got to do something.
okay. So you see this data, we know that we were talking about this before we started filming, that there's been a lot of great research that's already been done in trying to support LGBTQ students. So we know that having an adult in the building, having being represented in the curriculum, all these things make valuable contributions. But among these things that we know are effective supports, research-based effective supports, is the having a GSA within a district or within a high school. So sure, if you don't mind, like a little bit about like, so how did you kind of conceptualize this group, and then like how did you bring it forward in terms of trying to navigate the approval process?
Yeah, we really talked about it a lot as far as what it would be called. The first step was to see who would be willing to be the advisor.
Oh, okay.
You know, who's willing to step up and put themselves out there. Thankfully, we had an educator named Mackenzie Warren, who was an elementary art teacher, step forward. Mackenzie was pretty progressively minded, and we brought her into those conversations and decided that probably calling it a GSA wasn't in the best interest of anybody, including the students, for the future of anything. So we ended up calling it a SAFE club, SAFE. And SAFE stood for Students Advocating for Equality.
Okay.
So it was kind of pitched more as, what can this club do to create a more welcoming environment for all students, including students of color and LGBTQ students. But it really, the student body that it drew was, guessing here, more LGBTQ students than students of color.
Okay.
So it essentially, it looked more like a GSA than anything else.
So when an organization, because I know every group's different, so, or every district that the students are in is going to be different in terms of policies and practices. So in BSC, could you,
BCS, yeah.
BCS, sorry, could you just say like, now there's this club, does the principal have the authority to just say, now there's a new club, like here's like the sign up sheet, or is there approval process that needs to be kind of like navigated?
That wasn't really clear in our policies.
Okay.
But really it took some discussion with board members, because what the key thing that had to be done logistically, policy wise, was we had to post a position called Safe Club Advisor and determine a supplemental pay for that.
Gotcha.
That position. So that was kind of where the formal approval came in and we had some conversations, with board members, a lot of it in executive session. Some of it out of executive session about this
Sure.
and, I had probably one board member that was a very strong proponent of having this club. A second was somewhat supportive. And then I think where it was we had three who were willing to give me some leash,
Okay.
who were willing to, maybe they, I'm just interpreting here. They may not have been rah for it, but I think I had built enough credibility maybe and political capital, or whatever term you want to call it, that
Yeah.
that they were gonna let this go forward and kind of keep an eye.
Okay. So I'm just walking backwards just a little bit, is that if you tried to start a French club, that probably just gets rubber stamped.
Yep.
Right, and like
Yeah.
so the board, like, so this is interesting about the supplemental.
Yeah.
Pay, that makes a lot of sense, but they're probably not gonna like blink an eye at paying another $800 for like the person to like run the French club, right?
Right.
So you knew going in that this was going to be a little bit. It's not the French club, like this is going to be more complicated from like a political stance. So what was how did you present the data, or how did you present the information or the case for the GSA? Or I keep calling it that, but for the Safe Club.
It was presented in multiple ways over multiple sessions. So I remember an executive session where it was presented. But I think most importantly, there were individual conversations with me and board members.
Okay.
Just having those, there's no substitute for relationships. Talking to board members individually and hearing what their concerns may be. And I guess I don't want to share all those
Yeah,
concerns
course.
individually, but there were concerns. Well, I have more concern on X. Next board member, I'm more concerned with Y. And so you kind of talk them through that so that when you get to that point where you're asking for approval of that supplemental, it's kind of rubber stamped. The conversations have happened
Right.
ahead of time. And so that was really, really important, having those conversations ahead of time. And just to acknowledge some of the concerns that were out there about it. And some of those concerns I shared with board members. But kind of tiptoed through it, through those kind of conversations. And ultimately got the supplemental contract for the advisor approved. I remember the club started over the summer. It took almost this whole school year to kind of lay the groundwork. And I remember the first meeting was, I want to say in June, in an empty high school. And I remember talking to the group, and they had a lot of tough questions for me. Interestingly, basically, why did it take you so long to do this?
Okay.
Are you really going to listen to us? Are you really going to do anything about what we have to say? And they also just wanted to have a voice and let me know what their negative experiences at the school have been. They wanted me to hear it. And so that was a tough meeting, but also very joyous, that in the sense that it had happened. We had our first meeting.
Did it kind of catch you off guard? Like, did you kind of expect going in and
Yeah.
was it going to be like, hooray, like,
Yeah.
look what we have. We had nothing and now we have this, and to have it be a little more, I
Yeah,
can see like you describe it as joyous and,
it was joyous for me to see the students advocating for themselves,
The
to
engagement,
see
yeah.
them, to see their voice, that they had this superintendent who was listening to them and they were going to take this opportunity.
Yeah.
And the advisor was great about letting the students know, hey, guys, this is huge that we're even have this club. And she was really good about moderating them and trying to mediate some things for us. And she was awesome at that.
So at what point, if at any, did the public at large catch wind of the start of this group?
I don't know. Parents got wind of it, certainly, and I had some
Before
parents.
board approval?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
I think it was kind of not that much out there before it happened. It was just kind of, it was an internal posting.
Right. Well, I mean, that makes sense.
You know, and so people didn't see it, but certainly when, students became involved in the club, we had people's parents sign permission forms. Some parents wouldn't sign them. And I think that's kind of when the word started, getting out there.
Well, I would imagine that there was probably also other students in the high school who are going home and telling their parents, like, oh, there's this new club.
Yes, and they had a bulletin board. I remember the bulletin board got defaced a few times and some students got in trouble for it. And it really, as far as the backlash goes from the community, it wasn't great. It wasn't loud. It wasn't as terrifying maybe as we anticipated.
Do you think that, so what year was this again?
So it's 2000, it's 2020. Is it before the pandemic? I want to say it was 20, it was 2019, just before the pandemic.
Do you think as an educational leader, this is kind of a broad question? Are there like windows of opportunity? Like you had this political capital, but I am also wondering if it was 2022 in Ohio with the same microscope that's being placed on curriculum. Students did some reading, they learned about like Moms for Liberty, some of these different types of like organizations. Like, I'm imagining that maybe there's more of a blow up.
I would think you're right. I think that's right. I think we kind of got in just before that because it was before the pandemic and some of those groups who crusaded curriculum type issues. Yeah. I think it would have been probably would have been a lot harder, probably would have been a lot more public blowback. Yeah.
So how does like, what advice would you give to like, we have many teachers on the probably earlier side of their career, but they're emerging leaders. And so as a former superintendent, like what advice would you give to those educators who want to take on some of these like significant challenges? But in terms of like, what advice would you give them in terms of like how to approach the navigational aspect of this in terms of like picking that moment in time, like approaching diverse stakeholders to engage them in these topics? Do you have any general advice that you would share?
I think generally administrators, including myself, when I was one, we practiced defensive leadership. We were overly concerned maybe with a very small number of people who were extremely vocal. Teacher leaders have a huge role because if it wasn't for my teacher leader, Mackenzie Warren, who was willing to put her neck out there as advisor, and she had shared with me that she got personal blowback. She lived in our community.
Right.
She shopped in our community. She was visible in our community, and I give a lot of credit to her for her courage in stepping up and saying, I'll be the face of this and I'll be an advocate for this club. So teacher leadership for this in this case was essential. Someone who was willing to partner with myself and our high school principal to navigate through this and have, you know, the three of us, principal, teacher, and myself, had a lot of conversations behind closed doors on, you know, how we're going to handle this and how we're going to handle that. And are we going to, you know, have sticker, you know,
Safe
zone or ally type stickers, and when are we going to do that? Something that was extremely powerful that this group did in its first year was on opening day, where we have all the teachers in the auditorium. We had the safe group present to the staff and say, here's how you can make your classroom.
Oh, like in the PD, in the PD session.
Yeah, they did a PD, and it was probably the most powerful PD I've ever been part of. And our staff actually gave them a standing ovation to these high school students. So it was quite powerful. And I would attribute a lot of it to teacher leadership. So partnering with your administrators, teachers, partnering with administrators who are progressive and have progressive tendencies. We have to push each other in our profession sometimes, and sometimes administrators instinctually aren't the most, they practice that defensive leadership, and maybe they need a little bit of a push to be a little bit more courageous. And I think if teachers can identify those administrators, superintendents, principals, have those conversations, develop those relationships, the needle can be moved. And so there is power from the teacher's seat.
Did you find value in terms of any external partners who, that doesn't have to be like specific to the Safe Club, but in terms of local religious leaders or youth leaders, or were there other individuals who were helpful? Or was everything kind of like really kind of district politics governance? Where you kind of.
It was more district politics and governance, although once we had the Safe Club, we had parents. I had a few parents call me and say, thank you, appreciate what you're doing. It's great that you're doing this. So that was good to see too.
It's funny how those parents never turn out en masse
No,
at the school board meetings, right? Like you hear these things, but not typically the mob of affirmation
right.
that you receive in districts. Right. Well, one of the things that I think is interesting, and in looking at this occurring in other parts of the country, is that you made the decision based on that specific context, is that calling it a gay straight alliance would probably not be in the, you probably would not have been able to get it approved. And so you decided, or collectively, not just you, but collectively decided to try and brand it as a safe, as the safe club.
Safe Club, yeah.
So there would be some advocates or activists who might be upset with that decision. They might push back on it and say like, well, aren't you further marginalizing these students by not even allowing them to like name like the GSA? So if having a conversation with one of these people around the country who felt very strongly in that position, like how would you respond?
Well, we did have those conversations behind closed doors. You know, Mike May, who I mentioned earlier, was a football coach and a teacher. Teacher leadership exhibited par excellence, but you know, we did have those conversations. You can't get everything. I think you have to be pragmatic. In this case, we were pragmatic, called it the Safe Club. Those students who were part of that club felt proud. As our high school principal put it, the students who were in that club walked around the school like peacocks. You know, they had just another sense about themselves, a little bit more of a sense of belonging, a little more sense of welcoming. And I would say the trade-off for GSA versus Safe Club wasn't as, it was something, but at the end of the day, it was something that I think had to probably be given up in the environment that we were in. And those are tough ethical choices. Those are very tough ethical decisions that have to be made. Thankfully, this one wasn't made by one person. It was ultimately, I'm responsible for it, but it was made, you know, with a group and getting a lot of different people have input on it. People who knew the community and knew the politics weighed in on it. And I think you have to trust those voices and get it started, and then live to fight another day. I think so. Getting the Safe Club started was one step. There was more to do beyond that. And right. So I think with that in mind, we kind of left the GSA go and said, let's make it the Safe Club and go forward.
Did you ever have a chance to collect data again, like that student climate data? I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah,
I did it move the level?
I think it got a little bit better. what was great is that the students were able to, you know, you saw them becoming advocates for themselves. And that had to be balanced with, actually changing our policies and making changes to our curriculum. So one of the things that really, that our students really didn't like hearing is, well, you got to be an advocate for yourself. Okay, you can be an advocate for yourself all day, but that's not going to change how the social studies teacher teaches in the
Oh.
classroom.
Okay.
So our
Yeah.
students, I was really proud of them and their advocacy. Like, okay, yeah, we can be advocates for ourselves, but hey, administrators, you guys got to do something about this teacher who does this, and this teacher who has a Trump flag up in their room, and this teacher who says this in their class about
Okay.
LGBTQ kids or people. And so the students, having that club spurred us to, you know, look at changes and make changes. And, you know, I remember very distinctly a student told us, you know, there's this Trump flag in this classroom, and we, you know, made it come down. And they appreciated that. They saw, oh, okay, we voiced something and there was action taken. And so, thinking about the club, it was a little bit, you know, like the students maybe certainly didn't trust us 100%. Like,
Sure.
what are you doing with this club? Are you trying to exploit us? Are you trying to have this club just to make yourselves look good?
Yeah.
So there was some of that trust building that certainly had to happen. So while that's happening here, you're also trying to build trust and keep a lid on things for the community. So it was an interesting dance. Yeah.
Well, so thank you for sharing a little bit about your background and about your story of trying to lead these complex times. I think it was really informative. So thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Evans.
All right.